The Word of God tells us in 4 places that the sins of the fathers follow the children to the 3rd and 4th generation.
This declaration is not God being vengeful or mean. He is simply warning his people that there are indeed consequences for the ways they choose to live their lives.
Israel as a nation seems to struggle in grasping this reality. The result of this inability is brought to bear in the book of Daniel, as the nation lives in captivity in Babylon.
However, before we dive into the lessons of this book, it is prudent for us to have some understanding of what brought them to this time and place. There are many places we could start, but for now, let's go back to the 21st chapter of 2 Kings.
Manasseh has become the king of Israel, and this is how God began his story.
He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, following the detestable practices of nations. And yet God speaks to Israel as a nation.
I will not again make the feet of the Israelites wander from the land I gave their ancestors, if only they will be careful to do everything I commanded them, and will keep the whole law that my servant Moses gave them.
But the people did not listen. Manasseh led them astray so that they did more evil than the nations the Lord had destroyed before the Israelites.
The people and the king walk away from God, and as his word proclaims, there are consequences for the way we choose to live our lives. There's one last king who loves God and his law, Josiah, and yet his goodness cannot turn back the events set in motion by Manasseh's evil.
After Josiah, his son Jehoahaz becomes king, and God also begins his story with, "He did evil in the eyes of the Lord."
Then Jehoiakim becomes king, and his story too begins, "And he did evil in the eyes of the Lord," which included the shedding of innocent blood. For he filled the streets of Jerusalem with the innocent blood, and the Lord was not willing to forgive.
Finally, Zedekiah becomes king, and his story too begins. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And so, on the 7th day of the 5th month, in the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, commander of the imperial guard and an official of Babylon, came to Jerusalem.
He set fire to the temple of the Lord, the royal palace, and all the houses of Jerusalem. Every important building is burned down.
The whole Babylonian army, under the commander of the imperial guard, broke down the walls around Jerusalem.
Nebuzaradan, the commander of the guard, carried into exile the people who remained in the city, along with the rest of the populace and those who had deserted to the king of Babylon.
But the commander left behind some of the poorest people of the land to work in the vineyards and fields.
And so Daniel and others from Israel were carried back to Babylon as slaves.